Well, hi. Um, it's Grandpa Ricky one more time. This time I want to talk about things to do while you're quarantining. I've been enjoying telephoning people, having them telephone me, and FaceTime calls and Zoom calls and talking to people about movies that we're watching. The big problem is how to spend time together. Some people play cards. I'm not a card player. June likes to play cards, but I don't. Um, but I'm particularly impressed with all the ingenious things that parents are finding and grandparents are finding if they're living with their grandchildren to do with kids. And so I worked for a long time with kids. And, like rainy day recesses, what do you do with your class? Aside from letting them go nuts. So there are a number of games that you can play. One of them is getting kids to talk to one another, groups of two, and the game is called What Do You Think? And it encourages curiosity, which is good because so much in modern education is stamping out curiosity. And so one person, adult, says to the other person, well, what do you think about, and then you just, any topic that you think the other person might have an opinion about, and you try to get them to talk longer and longer. You start off with a minute, 2 minutes, and then when the person stops talking, you say, is there more? Do you have more to say about this topic? And I've just had the greatest conversation with adults and with kids. And some kids really like the game, and other kids, they're not confident enough to tell you what they're thinking. They want to play it safe. And so there's another game that helps kids do that. And it's called Hot Seat. And Hot Seat involves one person saying, okay, I'll sit on the hot seat, and anybody in the room can ask them a question. And you can do this on the phone or on Zooming or whatever. And you say, okay, you're sitting there, and I'm going to ask you any question that comes to my mind. And you can answer telling the truth. You can lie, which is a nice, fun game. Or you can say, I don't want to talk about that. So then you ask another question. And it's important that kids learn how to lie because you never know when they have to. And you can think up, I'm sure, all kinds of scenarios where if the kid tells the truth, the kid's going to be causing trouble for themselves or other people. And so it helps kids start to realize all of the different ways, to tell the truth all the time. There's ways to give a little bit of truth. Like somebody says, what do you think of this red scarf? And if you think it's really crappy, then you say something like, well, it sure is a red scarf, isn't it? And it's kind of like neutral. So that game teaches you neutral stuff. And the other thing comes from a friend of mine who taught in Australia, and she was influenced by somebody who wrote a book about this. This person was teaching in Aboriginal community, and there was no money for the schools or anything like that, or supplies, and they didn't have any books, and the kids, with the books they had, that didn't mean very much to the kids because the books were about totally unlike anything in the kids' lives. So the person got the kids to write their own books. And, you have to get somebody to start it off who knows how to write and knows how to print like adults. And so they say to the kid, well, tell me a story about what happened last night, or tell me a story about, what you had for dinner. What simple topics. What do you like? What do you think? Um, tell me about your ancestors. Um, tell me an interesting story that you heard, and whatever it is. And then these kids would write these little tiny booklets, and then they would sew them together. They didn't have staples. And then the kids could read each other's books. And then sometimes the kid would take the book they wrote, and they would try to read it, and then they would draw little cartoons or pictures and things like that. Um, and kids tend to like that. And then there's another game, and it's kids tend to like this. You can say, "Hey, can you?" And then you say, "Can you get across the room without using your hands or feet? Can you um, take up the least amount of space? Can you take up the most amount of space? Uh, can you make a strange sound? Can you cry?" I like to play games like, "Can you throw a temper tantrum?" Because some kids don't know how, and it's good that they learn because it's a physical expression. And other kids are really good at it, but they think that nobody knows that they're in charge of their kind of their temper tantrums. I think I've made some videos about this before. Um, and then there's a game where you say, um, well, who's your favorite person? Tell me a story about your favorite person. Um, it's dangerous to say, tell me a story about somebody you love, because the kids may not love anybody or may be frightened of, um, if the parents are divorced and one parent says, well, who, tell me a story about who loves you, and it might put the kid on the spot because they know that you don't like their parent or something like that. So you got to have a little sensitivity. Another big question is, well, what are the things that you'd really like to have? What do you want? And ask them, and then you can. Some kids find this one really hard. You can say, "What are you afraid of? What do you think about a lot? What do you worry about?" And then when the kids can talk about it, and you can listen to them, and you can say things like, "Well, wow, that's pretty scary," or "That's a story that doesn't need to happen, but what's your plan?" Um, if you hear gunshots, if that's what the kid's frightened of. Um, and I think I made a video about a friend of mine who was afraid of being shot in a plaza. She was, I think, 12 or 13. And it was interesting to see where that game went. The other one is to make things harder. Uh, can you eat with your if the kid is right-handed? Can you eat with your left hand? Um, what are 3 ways that you can sit down? What are 3 ways that you can get up? What are 3 ways you can lie down on the floor? What are 3 ways that you can walk? Uh, can you walk backwards? Um, so you get as creative as you can, and you're trying to get the kid to expand what they think they can do. And kids can really kind of get into this quite a bit. So I know there's things that I forgot. That's the problem about not writing a script about these things. And I ask you, I plead with you to make videos of what you're doing to keep yourself from, losing your temper and getting anger. Anger is the worst thing for cabin fever. And it's the worst thing when people are jammed in with one another, and also freaking out. about something, uh, you can always say, well, how are you feeling about, being indoors? And you just listen. There's nothing you can do about it. But you can say, yeah. And I wonder how it is for other people. And here's another thing that I started just for fun. Um, we're very fortunate. We've got enough food and we've got people who are shopping for us. But when this pandemic thing came on, I went out and restocked my supply of emergency food. And so we've got rice and beans and oil, cooking oil, olive oil, and coconut oil. And so I'm calling it solidarity cooking. And so most people are on really, really small amounts of food. More and more now every day. I hear there's food riots happening. A friend of mine's parents live in India, and she was saying her mother and father are now only able to get potatoes and bread, so they're having potato sandwiches and making them as interesting as they can. So adding anything they've got. I keep a lot of garlic on hand. I keep a lot of onions on hand. Those are two things which kill bacteria and kill germs if you eat them raw, along with ginger, turmeric, and things like that. So making simple food as interesting as you can. The other day, I was lucky enough to have somebody bring some sardines. So I had one sardine with rice and oil, and I had made a little ghee, and ghee is like unclarified, unsalted butter, and you can find out how to make it online. But you try to make the meal as colorful as you can. Tiny pieces of shredded carrot, things like that. So I hope this video has been helpful with your quarantining. And I am told that in my area, the virus isn't expected to have peak effect with the hospitals really overloaded until June. So that means more staycationing, more sheltering, more quarantining for me. And then I was told that it's expected that it'll come back in November. And then a doctor told me that many pandemics will come back a year later, sometimes stronger. And hopefully we'll be much more ready for